You found yourself on another episode of Locked On Bulls. In today's episode, me, Pat, and guest Mark K are going to break down the Bulls losing their draft pick in the lottery, which should be expected. What's next for the Chicago Bulls over the course of this offseason, and answering the question, does tanking actually work in the NBA? All that and more on today's Locked On Bulls.
You are Locked On Bulls, your daily podcast on the Chicago Bulls, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Bulls, member of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. That's Pat the Designer, host and creator of the Windy City Breeze and host of the official Chicago Bears podcast over at ESPN 1000. I'm Haize, host and creator of Chicago Bulls and Chicago Bears Central's YouTube pages and the official Bleacher Report correspondent for the Chicago Bulls. And we are joined by the great one himself, Mark K, is in the building over from GHGO Bulls. How you doing, Mark K?
I'm well, guys. Thank you for having me. I was hopeful that we'd be celebrating tonight, but instead we're commiserating. We're trying to pick each other's spirits up after. Well, I guess we shouldn't be mad because this was the expected outcome. This was the most likely outcome. Yeah. So probability suggested this was going to be how we should have been feeling, all that sort of stuff. But emotions are a funny thing, I suppose. So is sports, and here we are, probably lamenting the situation. So it is what it is, unfortunately. But it's going to be a tough offseason, guys. It's going to be a tough offseason.
Yeah, it's going to be a very long offseason. One of the things that we do not have to look forward to this offseason is worrying about any draft prospects, because the Chicago Bulls were not able to work any lottery magic at all. We did lose our pick. That's going to be number 11 over to the Orlando Magic. Pat, man, your video is out. It's very well documented, your reaction to the Bulls not coming out of the lottery. But how are you feeling now, a couple of hours removed from it?
It still sucks. It does. Here's the thing. I didn't expect us to come away with this pick. I just didn't want the last pick to be the one that we lost it on. And when we got the 12, I was like, okay, maybe we got a shot. And I'm at Mark, the COO of the NBA head, because I feel like he held that card up where you couldn't see from Chicago Bulls perfectly. So it was like, Orlando, they put that mug back down. I'm at your head, my boy. But no, I mean, listen, this was like Mark K said, this was the expected outcome. This is 1.8% chance, right? You're not going to get that lucky twice in a lifetime. And the Bulls got there one time. And even the funny part is everybody was tweeting out the picture of Woj in front of it. I don't know if you saw that one, Mark, but it had the Bulls in the 4th spot. And I was like, that's the practice round. Yeah. Me and Haize both said, there's all our luck. That's where all our luck went right there.
Yeah, it's super unfortunate, just everything that happened. Mark, I'll come to you on this one. When you were watching the lottery, how much genuine hope did you have that the Bulls are going to pull it out? Because the way that the season went, I've learned one thing: don't have much hope when it comes to the Chicago Bulls. What about you, Mark?
Yeah, I didn't have hope per se. I was maybe trying to trick myself in the last couple of minutes leading up to the lottery. Okay, maybe 8.5% chance. I wasn't trying to trick myself into Wemby, let's say. I wasn't getting my hopes up into Wemby. I wasn't, doing photoshops of Wemby in Bulls jerseys or anything of that nature. I wasn't going that far, but 8.5% chance getting into the top 4. I thought that was somewhat possible. We've seen in years past teams in that sort of 11 to 14 range jumping up into the top 4. I think the Lakers did it one year. There's been other teams that have popped up here and there over the last few years since the NBA's reinstituted this different lottery system. So I had some little tiny modicum of hope that maybe they could get back up into the top 4. But in terms of getting into the Wemby sweepstakes, I wasn't fooling myself into that. But I think the part that hurt the most was what you noted, where they held up the what's the name? They didn't necessarily hold up the Bulls card or the Bulls logo. And at that point, it's like, okay, they're holding up the Magic, but there's just not enough time to compute what's exactly happening in that situation. You expected to either see a Bulls logo or another team logo. And the minute you saw another team's logo for like that 5 to 10 second period, that's when the hope turned into, I guess, believing that this actually had happened. So, but then you realize, wait a minute, that's not actually possible. What could have transpired? And then, reality starts to kick in, the emotion dissipates, and, the facts start to be what they are. And then it's like, oh God, for that split second, I believed into something, and just to have it all, come crashing down. So that's probably the part that hurt the most. Like, had they just pulled up a Bulls card and we knew then and there that they'll pick in 11th, I would have been like, okay, cool. This was the expected outcome. But because they gave you that glimmer of hope, I was like, that took it away.
I don't like that. I feel like they did that to us last year too, when we gave up who did we give our pick to last season? Didn't we have a pick that went to somebody else last year?
The year before to the
Year
Magic.
before.
Year before. Oh, that's right.
We owned our own pick last year because it was daily.
Yes. Well, but yeah, I felt like that. Like, no, like put up a Bulls logo. If I saw a Bulls logo, there is no hope. It's like, all right, it's Dash now. But I saw the Orlando logo. I was like, so you're saying there's a chance? I don't know, man. I don't know. That one hurt me. I'll ask y'all this, right? Like when you look at kind of what has happened, how do you look at the Vooch trade now? I think Vooch is a good player. I think he's been a consistent player for the Bulls. I don't know if he's been 2 lottery picks good.
Well, you got to keep in mind, we didn't trade for who Vooch is now. We were trading for that time a center that was averaging 20 and 10. That was an all-star at that time. So it's still, in hindsight, of course, the deal doesn't look good. And I won't say that the Bulls, we didn't win the deal by any stretch of the imagination. But you paid the price that I think now, a 20 and 10 all-star caliber center, you're probably getting a similar deal at the same time. And he was 2 years younger at that time as well. It just
31?
ended up just not working out. The way, huh?
I said 31, right? 31 years old when we got him.
Yeah, 31 years old. So what about you, Mark?
Yeah, look, I still, it probably was an overpay at the time, but my thing that the way I think about this and the way I thought about it on the night that they traded for him as well, like the value of the trade or how we review the trade, the way we think about this trade, it was a thing that could evolve over time, and it was going to be dictated by what ultimately happened with these draft picks. Now, obviously, they gave up the 8th pick in 2021, but had the Bulls done some more stuff at that deadline, had they got into the playoffs, had Zach not got COVID at that situation and had the season not fall the way it did, then maybe you're not giving up the 8th pick in that draft. Maybe you're giving up the 14th or 15th pick or whatever it might have been. So, okay, cool. That changes that element of the trade. You're not giving the Magic the 8th pick, which ultimately turned into Franz Wagner. And then in this case, in 2023, we obviously know that they were trying to get into the postseason, ultimately didn't, got in, had the 10th, 11th best odds to do what they needed to do in this particular draft. But again, like had you built out your team either in the offseason, the 22 offseason, or at the trade deadline, done more to sort of bolster this team and given them more of a legitimate chance to be better than what they were, then ultimately the pick that you're giving up to the Magic now, instead of it being the 11th pick, could have been the 17th, 18th, 19th pick or something like that. So because they were just so stagnant in that transaction cycle, obviously that limited the team for what they could be in the postseason this season, or they didn't even make the postseason, but you guys know what I'm getting at here.
Yeah.
But so it limited what they could be from that point of view, but it also sort of enhanced what you're potentially giving up to the Magic in that Vooch trade. So from that point of view, that there is a reality where had the Bulls been more aggressive, being willing to add more pieces, spend more money, bring in more guys, that the picks that they're giving up in the Vooch trade could have been worse for the Magic. And in doing so, that would have made the Vooch trade look better than what it ultimately does today. And the reason it looks so poor right now is because you've given up 2 lottery picks. And part of the reason you've given up 2 lottery picks is because you just didn't do all you could to make the current team as good as possible. And it ended up being what it is now. So that's why it looks, worse than what it needed to be.
That is a great point. I'm not gonna lie. I've never thought of it from that aspect of it. I've always thought of it from the play that we've gotten from Vooch, which I still think has been solid for your number 3 overall. But breaking it down into that sense, that it really shows you, right? Like it kind of goes back to what we talked about yesterday with AK. He's got it. Like the biggest sin for me with AK coming into this season is not continuity. It's trusting that Lonzo was going to be healthy and not being aggressive enough to go out and get another point guard.
Yeah, I mean, you look at if the Bulls had been more active at free agency or the trade deadline. We're talking about, as Mark said, giving them up a sub lottery pick, and at that point, it does reframe how you look at that deal. So, AK and the Bulls overall, not being as aggressive, not going into the luxury tax, number of things that you want to put a name on it, it affects the Bulls in a multitude of ways, and we're going to be feeling the effects of that going forward. Next up, we're going to talk about what is next for the Chicago Bulls in the offseason now that we know that we are not getting a draft pick. It's not happening, so we're going to talk about what's coming next. But before we do that, I got to talk to you guys about one of our sponsors, and that is Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs has clothes that just fit. They make sense. It brings a level of comfort. You can wear them around the house. You can wear them to work out in, jog in, whatever you need to do. One of the things about Bird Dogs that I like in my pair of Bird Dogs is just the overall level of comfort. You guys can't see it. I'm actually wearing it right now in the studio as I'm recording this because it's just comfortable. It just is that. So
I was going to say, if you stand up, we all are logging off.
That's a very different story there. But Bird Dogs, not only can you look great, but you can feel great as well when you wear them. Brings that versatility, as I mentioned before. So go to birddogs.com/lockedon, and when you enter promo code LockedOnNBA, they'll throw a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler, which I had somewhere around my desk that's not here anymore. So make sure you guys go and check out Bird Dogs. Again, that's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA and enter promo code LockedOnNBA at purchase for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your purchase. Pat, Mark, I don't know anymore with this team. I've been a fairly optimistic Bulls fan for years. I've been trying to be very optimistic. It makes it so much harder with this team. But next up, we're going to talk about what is next for the Chicago Bulls team as we head to go through this offseason, an offseason that regardless of draft pick or not, we need to make changes to this roster. Mark, I'll come to you first. You're the guest today. What do you think is next or should be next on the Bulls checklist to do to kind of reform this team?
Man, that's a bloody tough question. That is a tough question. And look, it's hard to answer this question just because, ultimately the answer of that question is going to be dictated by ownership and what they're prepared to do or what they're going to allow you to do. So, for example, what I'm saying here is if they're not going to allow you to go into the tax or to use all of your mid-level exception because that might put you into the tax or it might, hard cap you as a team, then that changes so many different things that you can or can't do in the offseason. So that's the first impediment. But then from thereafter, I guess the thing that we've all been talking about now, and we've touched on it already on this podcast, is like the whole continuity thing. Like, what are you doing from a strategic standpoint? Do you want to continue this continuity thing, or should you be moving away from that? Now, me personally, I definitely want to be moving away from this whole continuity aspect. I think they should be blowing it up of sorts. Like, that would be my preferred course of action. I'd be trading Zach, I'd be trading DeMar, and do what you need to do with Vooch, but I'd be moving on at this point. But that's what I wanted to do at the deadline. The team hasn't given me any reason to believe in otherwise, particularly after tonight when we know that they're not necessarily going to have a first round pick, or at least not keeping their pick. So I think I'm going the nuclear approach. That's what would be my preferred outcome. Now, is that realistic? No, I don't think that's what the franchise is going to do. I don't think ownership is going to sign off on that. I certainly don't think that's what AK wants to do. Everything AK has said and done, whether it's his, via his actions, whether it's via his words, it seems like continuity is the thing that's going to continue. Maybe they're just saying that, and maybe it changes up in July, but they've given us no reason to believe that, I suppose. So I'm expecting more of the same, but I guess from my standpoint, what I would be doing is pretty much the 180 of that and just tearing it all down, because I kind of feel like we know what this team is. We know what it can be. We've seen it maxed out to some degree. You're not getting Lonzo back for next season, and if you do get him back at all, he's not going to be the same Lonzo, and it's kind of like ridiculous to even hope that if he can come back, he can be the same guy that he was. So I'd be moving on. I'd be blowing it up. I'd be doing a lot of different things, but I don't know how feasible that is, guys.
Yeah, that's fair. This team does seem against blowing it up. AK even in this postseason presser said that they aren't considering a rebuild. Pat, throw it to you on this one, man. What would you like to see, and what do you think the Bulls are going to do next in free agency?
Here's what the next conversation was going to be if we were going to get a top 4 pick, right? What are they going to actually do with this player? What are they going to actually allow this player to do? I don't know if people remember this. We have a top 4 pick. We really haven't let him play basketball. We just kind of told him go out there and do some stuff. Now, granted, we've had concerns about his mentality. He said he's got to play more, but we've all talked about how as a top 4 pick, he hasn't been put in that position to be a top 4 pick and have the opportunity the top 4 picks have. We still have a top 7 pick on this team already that we just now figured, okay, maybe since he showed us a little bit at the end of the season, now it's time for him to make plays. We have a 18th overall pick who played the fewest minutes of any 18th overall pick in NBA history. You know what I want the Chicago Bulls to do? One, I want them to go out and get a point guard so that people can actually play the positions they're supposed to play. Excuse me. Choked up on all that BS that Billy Donovan's out there putting out. But the other thing that I want you to do is allow your young pieces to try and take steps. If that means moving on from DeMar DeRozan, if that means moving on from Nikola Vucevic, but I don't know what you're doing at the big man position at that point, but allow your young pieces. What you mean? Oh, Jesus Christ. I saw your tweet, by the way, Mark. Mark said if Marco had been at the draft, we would have won the pick.
That's wild. That's
but
crazy.
I just feel like, right, like the thing is, I would have loved to get another top 4 pick this season, but would we have played him? Would we have used him? Would he have been able to crack the rotation of the team that we already have? Because I see Javonte every night. I see DJJ every night. I see, right, like, well, not every night. DJJ getting in a lot of second halves out there. But I see guys that aren't the guys that you think are your future, who are top picks on this team, not getting to finish games, not getting opportunities to get the ball when they've been hot, not getting opportunities to go out there and try to do more. And so to me, right, at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing this Bulls team needs to do is actually see what you have. Realistically, we don't know what these guys are when they have a full slate of things and they're actually playing the right position.
Yeah, I think this may be the year that you really do want to take a look at your young guys and to really see how they're going to develop, what part do they really have in the future. The Bulls do own their own first round pick in 2024. So if you play your young guys a little bit more, rely on them a little bit more heavily, and it doesn't work out to your favor, you're another middling team that's scratching by to get into the play-in, we won't have the question on, are we going to hold on to our pick? We have our pick outright. So that may be the move this season, and especially when you look at the Bulls not having much room under the luxury tax to really operate to make the moves we may want them to make. It may be a year in which we do say, Pat, Dalen, Kobe, this is your time. Show us what you got.
I think you almost have
on that though. Like, I guess my thinking is, look, I'm not big on Kobe and Pat and Dalen when it comes to thinking these guys have star upside. Like, I think they all can be good role guys. I think they can impact winning in certain situations, all that sort of thing. So don't get me wrong. I think they can be good players in the right situation. But at that point, like, if you're pivoting towards giving Pat and Kobe and Dalen and I or whoever it may be more time, like, just go the whole way, I guess, is my point. Like, even though that I'm not big on them from a star upside point of view, at that point, like, what's the point of having Vooch? What's the point of having DeMar? Like, if you're wanting to give more minutes to these guys, then let's do the whole thing. Let's get rid of DeMar. Let's get rid of Vooch, because we're wasting their time as much as, you know, those guys are wasting the time of Pat and Kobe, Ayo, etc. So, like, it kind of be going halfway, I suppose. So I can get down with giving, you know, Pat more minutes or Dalen more minutes or Kobe more minutes, more opportunity, all that stuff. I don't really love it if the idea is to try to keep winning, try to keep doing the thing around Zach, DeMar, and Vooch. Like, if that's the idea, then those guys still are better than Kobe. They're still better than Pat and Dalen. I don't want to be taking the ball out of those guys' hands to give it to the younger guys. So at that point, like, to give the younger guys the necessary possessions or that time to grow on ball or whatever it might be, then let's just get rid of DeMar. Let's get rid of Vooch. Maybe even get rid of Zach. Like, Zach's 29 next season. It's not like he's in his prime. He's still obviously got, you know, several good years ahead of him. But, like, the next iteration of good Bulls teams, Zach's probably going to be 32, 33. So at this point, like, what are we doing? Let's cash out type thing, and let's try to pivot and retool. So that's where I'm coming from. So even though that I'm not the biggest Pat guy or Kobe guy, if you want to give them more time and see what they've got, then let's go the whole way, I guess.
I'm okay with DeMar and Vooch, right? Because I think, one, if you trade DeMar, the part I think a lot of people forget is you're not just giving up DeMar. You have to trade DeMar, which means you're getting something back. Probably some sort of draft capital, or maybe a player that's, you know, a nice role player, whatever it is. But I think that removes the safety blanket. right? Like I'm fine with having Zach LaVine on the team with those guys. That was the team that we thought we were going to have anyway at the start of all of this. I think to me, there's such a safety blanket. There has been such a safety blanket for guys like Kobe White and Pat Will, where they just defer to the oldest vet that's on the floor at the time. I got to give the ball to Goran Dragic. I got to get the ball to Andre Drummond. I got to get the ball to DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, Zach LaVine, whoever it is. And I think that we see, right, like we've seen flashes. I'm not saying we've seen consistency from it at all. And it's been my biggest problem with P. Will. But we've seen where, like, when you take all those things away from him, all of a sudden he magically knows, like, okay, I have to go to the rim because nobody else is going to do it. Like, I think that giving guys the opportunity to shine, we kind of did that with Larry Marketing too, giving guys the opportunity to shine where it's just on you, like you're a top 4 pick, changes how a guy has to go out there and play.
Well, it forces development, right? Because you
got no choice but to do it.
It's not a choice on do I take this shot or pass this. It's a choice of no, I'm taking the shot. And that's where, even running design plays and things can factor in. But you also got to like, I said this before, you can try to motivate Patrick Williams all day long, but until he realizes that he wants it, it's going to be such a tall test for him. But yeah, the Bulls try to live in two worlds, right? They try to have veterans where they still kept their young pieces and I guess hope that their young pieces were going to grow through osmosis, and it didn't work. You have to pick a path this offseason. So,
no, 100%. I'm with you on that. Because Lord knows the path we heading down. It's just like, hey man, these dudes are getting that's the hilarious part. Like we talked about Lonzo yesterday. The funniest part about it is you're not getting back 31-year-old Vooch and 32-year-old DeMar DeRozan when Lonzo Ball comes back off of his injury. You're getting 33-year-old Vooch and 34-year-old Vooch and 33-year-old DeMar. Like it's
other way around.
It's whatever it is. It's a different team. Math don't be math.
Who needs math? Well, we don't have to have logic here. But
logic.
Before we go, so this whole kind of collab came about between the conversation between Mark and Pat on Twitter about tanking and tanking working or not. Pat, I'm gonna throw it over to you. I'm gonna kind of let you.
Why is he taking a sip of water now?
He's getting ready to eviscerate you. That's what it is. You gotta get ready.
No, I mean, the conversation was basically on Twitter, right? Should the Bull have tanked to try to give themselves a better chance at this top 4 pick? And I brought my thoughts to the show kind of yesterday when we started talking about this. But so, Mark, lay out why you believe that the Chicago Bulls should have gone nuclear, like you said, and tanked to try and get better talent.
Well, look, I mean, it's just a fundamental disagreement in how to. Well, I guess it's not super serious. Let's start there. Like it's a disagreement on philosophy.
Oh yeah.
It's a sports disagreement. It wasn't beef.
Yeah.
It's not C-Red Fred out here. By the way, that's tough. That's
C-Red Fred. I love C-Red Fred.
Mark thought that Philly was going to the ECF or the finals. One of them.
The finals.
And Matt bet him that he has to pay him $15 and compliment C-Red Fred.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that's tough. I haven't made good on that bet, but one day. But coming back to the topic of tanking and those sorts of things, like, and coming back to what I said before, like I thought at the deadline that the Bulls probably should have shopped Zach LaVine. From my perspective, it's like, all right, how do we maximize value now? Like, this team's clearly not it. How do we maximize value for the next group of Bulls, whoever that might be on their team, whether it's the guys already here like Pat and Kobe, or whether it's not even these guys? How do you maximize the next iteration of the team? And for me, I was about trading Zach, getting as much as he could for Zach. And it's not because I dislike Zach, it's because I think he's the most valuable asset they have on the team, despite the contract, all that sort of thing. So for me, I was in that rebuild mode. So that shapes my thinking around this tanking thing about, you're not getting anything out of this current squad. Okay, cool. You're putting together this fake run here with Pat Bev. You got to the last game in the play-in situation. You might have, got it, or you would have got into the playoffs had you beaten the Heat, but ultimately that didn't happen. So You've really impacted your chances to get into the Wemby sweepstakes. And we know what this draft is at the top. It's pretty damn amazing. And I guess my argument for it is, look at what the Blazers did. The Blazers rested their guy. They rested Dame. They rested their other players who, are decent, can contribute to the lineup. And they ultimately bottomed out from a similar position where the Bulls were at, like in that 10th, 11th range, and really went for it. And they ultimately landed 5th in the draft. Now, they didn't get up and grab Wemby, but they did get up and get up from 5th into 3rd. So my thing is, it's all, what can you do? What can you control to maximize your chances at getting that next star? Now, obviously, getting the 3rd pick, getting the 1st pick, whatever it might be, like that doesn't guarantee you anything. And Pat, we were going about it like in relation to the Sixers. Like my thing with the Sixers isn't the tanking that has failed them, because I think the tanking put them in fantastic position to get all these good players. What's undone the Sixers is the decisions thereafter, the roster construction thereafter. So I think from a process point of view, getting up into that draft and getting your hands on a 1st pick or a 3rd pick or whatever it might be, like that's where I wanted to be at. That's what I wanted this Bulls team to be doing, and just sort of being realistic about what their current situation is and trying to maximize their value as much as possible. I don't think they did that based on, obviously, they were trying to go for the play-in. And as we know now, they don't have a 23 pick, or they don't have a pick in this current draft at this stage. So they haven't really done anything to really maximize the value of this team, and that's my beef with it. But from a tanking point of view, more generally, I think that's the best way to go about it if you want to, maximize your ability to add value. Now, like I said, tanking doesn't guarantee you shit. Nothing guarantees you anything in the NBA. But like, what's my best possible avenue to maximize value? And for me, tanking is the best way, unfortunately.
I think my biggest pushback is this, right? What it takes for you to tank usually causes you to not be in a position for that player to stick around by the time he's actually good, or because you're not going to hit on every 1st round pick, especially, right? The Sixers are a great example. They missed on a lot of dudes, even though they picked pretty much the dude that was supposed to be the number 1 pick in that draft. I mean, Nerlens Noel, that was a terrible draft, and Michael Carter Williams was an awful draft. But when you start to look at the ones after that, right? Like they took the number 1 guy coming out of college. They took the best players out of college, and it just doesn't pan out sometimes. The thing for me is that to put yourself in that position takes you out of the sweepstakes, where the Bulls right now are 40 and 42 win team. If you move on from DeMar, if you move on from Vooch, okay, maybe you take a little bit of a step back. But the one thing that we've heard from NBA teams around or from NBA players around the league is that they actually like Zach LaVine. They actually want to play with Zach LaVine. But I'm not going to play with Zach LaVine on a 10-win team. I'm not going to look to come to Chicago on a 5-win team. Heck, when we got DeMar, when we got Lonzo, when we got Vooch, everybody was excited to come here because they wanted to be around Zach and they wanted to help build this thing that was all coming together. So for me, right, I think that you're going to win with stars that are already in the league. Now, the biggest problem that all 3 of us agree with is that Jerry Reinsdorf is just not going to overpay for anybody. He's not going to put the big money to any of these players. But to me, the best way for you to win is to go out and get a veteran, right? Like, yeah, you want that young guy. You want that guy that's coming up. You want to find that next superstar. But realistically, there's a new superstar that's sick of his team every single season that the Bulls should be in the market for, but you don't put yourself in those conversations if you're a 22-win team.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And then look, I don't disagree with anything you noted there. And I would say, yes, let's do that. But the issue with doing that at the moment is like the Bulls can't really do that because obviously they owe draft picks. Yeah. They owe the Magic pick, they owe the Spurs pick, so they can't do that big Durant type trade because they don't have their full suite of picks. Right. And even beyond that, they don't necessarily have the salary to send out in that type of trade as well. So it's not ideal from that point of view. So I don't disagree with you. Like I love the idea of trading for stars, or whether it be trading for stars or trying to get it done via free agency. Obviously, we know the Bulls' history in free agency, but just because it has failed in the past, I don't think you just completely throw away that plan more generally. But yeah, I love the idea of trading for stars, but I just think where the Bulls are at this stage, I didn't think that was a possible outcome, unfortunately. So I guess my position on it is more about where this team currently is and what's the best avenue for them currently. And from my vantage point, I thought they should have blown it up and rebuilt it and tried to tank it away, just because they're limited at all other avenues to do so. Like I said, because they had traded their draft picks and that sort of stuff on Vooch and DeMar, you can't put in that deal for Durant or insert whoever that next superstar is. So what else are you going to do? They're kind of stuffed, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's that I think that is the tough part, right? It's like, should they run back continuity? And we all just are like, they don't really have a choice. There's not many options out here except continuity now because of the position you put yourself in. He swung big. I'll give him that. AK swung big. He missed. It was a loud pop-up.
The unfortunate thing is that there are options, but there are options that the Bulls can't explore because of ownership.
Yeah.
90% of ownership of teams with the situation that the Bulls are in. I know that Lonzo would have to volunteer for us to get the career-ending injury exception, but we can file for disabled player exception. But the Bulls are not going to do that and not use it because that would send the Bulls into the luxury tax. Yeah. Most teams would do that at least that one season willingly to try to bring in a starting point guard while still using your mid-level exception to add to this team. So it's a combination of a few things. It is a combination of what you and Mark said, but then there's also a combination of the fact that we're in a situation that is not favorable to the team at all, especially with Lonzo Ball's contract, but we have an avenue to try to alleviate that sum that this team is just not going to explore because we know that ownership doesn't want to go into the luxury tax. It's double downing, really, in a lot of ways.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. And coming back to what we were talking about before, Haize, like about the fact that the Vooch trade could have looked better than what it did. Like, okay, the Bulls didn't use their mid-level exception or the full allowance of that mid-level exception last offseason. They didn't do that because it would have pushed them into the tax, or likely would have pushed them into the tax. They used the partial amount of that to bring in Andre Drummond. But because they didn't use that, obviously the team remained somewhat stagnant. It became the continuity thing. And like we said, like, they ultimately landed where they did in giving up the 11th pick. But because there's these constraints that exist based on what ownership want to do, coupled down with what you just noted there in terms of the mistakes that AK has made, it puts you in the situation where you're very stagnant, which means you're going backwards in this day and age of the NBA. And it's having multiple effects here. It's ultimately impacting what you can do or what your team is on the court, as we saw in the 2022-23 season, but it's ultimately impacting your draft. It's impacting what you can or can't do in the offseason, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point that your actions here, okay, cool, we're looking at them in a silo situation. It's one thing that is impacting free agency at a specific time or the draft at one specific time. But the action that you make today is going to have flow-on effects that are going to limit you or potentially impact you in a whole bunch of other ways. And we're seeing that now. We're living that right now.
That's a fact.
One thing I'll say is continuity is important. We do have to, I know that, like, when Chicago teams say things, right, like, and they overuse them, we say it as bad. Like, continuity is important. Bucks being at the top is because everybody's played with each other for a long time. Denver being in the Western Conference Finals now is because these guys know where to be. Freaking the Golden State Warriors, it's continuity. Continuity are the teams that get to the NBA Finals and win the NBA Finals more times than not. It's why I give the Miami Heat a fighting chance to actually get back to an NBA Finals, because everybody on that team know how everybody plays, and they know Jimmy Butler might punch you in the mouth if you don't listen. So you got to take all that stuff into account, but you also have to find that right core. And I think that AK's building this team very much how many of the Denver teams were built, in which you'll be competitive until we find the right core. We'll add pieces until we find the right core. We'll put guys in place and have placeholders until we find the right core. And I think that that's the part that Bulls fans are going to have a hard time stomaching, because Jerry Reinsdorf owns this team and AK is going to be here for a long time. 100-year extension for AK.
Yeah, look, I think continuity is a good and fine thing, but so long as it's used on the right group of players, as you noted. Like continuity, like what the Nuggets are doing right now, like that core deserves continuity in part because you have someone like Jokic, Giannis with the Bucks, Curry with the Warriors, whatever it might be. Like you keep continuity in that instance because you've got your top level guy, and then you've got the stars around him thereafter. Yeah, but after that, like it's like, why do teams like the Bulls deserve continuity? Like that's the trick. So I don't think Bulls fans ultimately have an issue with continuity as a concept. It's probably like when it's applied to, or who it's applied to. That's the problem. And right now, like, why are we applying continuity to Vooch, who's maybe not even a top 50 player at this point? Like you guys noted before, DeMar's 34 going into year 15, and Zach, as good as he is not an all NBA guy. So it's like, why are we putting continuity with this group? Like, that's the problem.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's it.
Let's get out of here, man. Let's call it one. It was a good episode. Always a pleasure. love having Mark on this one, man. I mean, listen, the at the end of the day, Bulls, right? Yeah, it is what it is. Drop the C-Riz in the chat. Popcorn, Bulls. Follow us on everything at Locked On Bulls. You can follow me on everything at Pat the Designer. Mark, let them know where they can find you at, man.
At MK Hoops on Twitter, just yelling about the Bulls as we've done here today, and then I catch us over at GHGO Bulls as well. Matt, Big Dave, and Will are on there 4 days a week, and then my ugly face pops up once a week. So if you're into that, once you've got done listening to Locked On Bulls, head over and support us over at GHGO Bulls.
Absolutely. You guys can follow me at CEO Haize, at CEO Haize. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Bulls. We will be back tomorrow, as we are daily, even during the offseason, covering this godforsaken team. For Pat the Designer and Mark Hay, this has been Locked On Bulls. We're out, y'all. Peace.
Guys, still not listening.